to the city facing the current challenges. Actually, this is the title of the booklet that we've produced in a jointly manner with the Claxo and the Platform for the Right to the City. I'm Henrique Frota from the Global Platform for the Right to the City, and also from the editorial team that produced and organized this booklet or this document that we are going to launch this now. So it's double the pleasure because we are going to have, because this will be a wonderful webinar, a great discussion, but it's also a great pleasure to be here launching once again this document with text that are very important in order to reflect on the current challenges on the right to the city. So, and we are organizing 4 webinars in this cycle of webinars. Today, we are getting started with the first one. That is the specific subject matter of cities and human settlement, and with quality public spaces. We're going to have other 3 webinars, and please, I invite you all to visit the web of the Global Platform for the Right to the City to know the other subject matters. And at the end of the day, I'm going to show you the next date for the next discussions. So, as a little introduction, I would like to remind you that we've got interpretation for English and Spanish. So you can see there in your menu in the Zoom, there's a little globe that's called interpretation. And you can choose whether you would like to choose the original audio. Many of the presentations will be done in Spanish, but you can also to listen ourselves in English as well. So please, you go to the language that you feel more comfortable with. So I will ask you, please maintain your mics and cameras closed, and only our guests that will present will open those videos with open videos. So today, this first webinar, as I told you, has as a main subject the cities and human settlers with quality public spaces. We've got this agenda. This is my introduction. Then we are going to listen the author of 2 of the articles of these publications that our document produced between Claxo and the Platform for the Right to the City, from Maira Vannuchi from StreetNet International and Pilar Balbuena from WIEGO. And then we're going to listen also Sofia Bonilla from the public space from Glasswing International. And then we're going to have the great pleasure to listen Luisa Bravo, that is part of Journal of Public Spaces. Luisa is developing work as a consultant for the Global Platform for the Right to the City to produce a thematic paper of a thematic article on the subject matter of this webinar, that is of cities and quality public spaces. Then after the presentation, then we're going to have a space for discussions. We're going to have a round of questions. And please, I invite you from right now, from the very beginning, that please, you can share on the chat, on the Zoom chat, your questions, so forth. And our team will be organizing and collecting the questions for the discussion rounds. So to kick off, I would like to show you this document that we have produced between Claxo and the Global Platform. This article or this workbook has as a subject the current challenges of the right to the city, and it's available in the library, in Claxo's library, and also in the website of the Global Platform for the Right to the City. Well, I ask my colleagues from the platform, please share all the links where people could find and see this publication in the internet. This is an online free of charge publication, so please use and abuse of those documents, because we've got the state of the actors, and I would like to thank as well all the editorial commission from Claxo through the people of Luis Bonilla, that's a coordinator of the Claxo workbooks, and our colleagues Manuel and Pablo that also coordinate the working group or the urban working group from Claxo that were essential in organizing this workbook. So this is an initiative, a joint initiative between two organizations, Claxo and Global Platform for the Right to the City. And the idea here is to create dialogue based from the texts that are presented here. This is an invitation for continuing to question our current reality based on the collective memory of the cities and reflecting on the transformation opportunities that we face and we need to continue to create. Always taking into consideration that the right to the city is a live concept, always changing based on the social struggles and actions. That's our perspective from the Global Platform for the Right to the City. And another aspect that is also very important for the discussion during these webinars is the Global Platform for the Right to the City is developing since last year these thematic papers. So in 2020, with participation of this team of consultants, Álvaro Puertas, Edicio Fernández, and Eva Garcia Chueca, the platform produced and launched these, in October, we are going to launch the last couple of ones. These three thematic papers. First one on the right to the city and climate change, the other cities as a common asset or common good, and the last one of the right to the city and the COVID-19 pandemic. And now in 2021, we're developing four another thematic papers, one on cities free from discrimination, another from for inclusive urban-rural links, another for inclusive citizenship, and the fourth one that will be of quality public space. And this one is being developed by Luisa Bravo as a consultant of our platform in a process that it's not only production of knowledge, because of course we work with different dimensions of articulated. So we've got, this is a research production knowledge, but also is articulated with political advocacy so that the authorities, national authorities, international authorities, and local social movements could dive into these subject matters and to the experiences. It also is a work for civilization, bringing awareness of these subject matters that are specific, important for the right to the city. And last, we also involve with training activities from based with these materials that are being developed. So we are working with like circles that add knowledge. This important work of all the consultants, but it's but we are also making collective discussions with reference groups between members of the platforms, experts, members of organizations, social movements, and also organizes broader dialogue spaces like these ones. And this process also has a period. We are in the middle of all the process, and we've got all our consultants already delivering some documents, then making the revision of the documents, of the work, of the drafts. And at the end of the October is when we would love to have all that work ended in order to publish these thematic articles between the end of this year, begin next year. That was all, and I think please pay attention to the social networks of our global platform, because it's where we're going to setting when and tell you when these all this work is ready. So after this introduction, then I would like to invite Maira, Vannuchi, and Pilar Balbuena, that from StreetNet International and WIEGO, that are actors or the ones that launched the workbook of Glaxo platform, global platform, regarding the right to the city and informal workers in public spaces. So thank you very much, Maira and Pilar, for your presence, your availability, and for this issue that is so important for the discussion for public spaces. So now the word is with you, and you've got 15 minutes for your presentation. Thank you, Maida, please. Thank you, Henrique. It's a great pleasure to be here and share with you my presentation. I am here with my colleague, with Pilar, my teammate here, and we've prepared this article in order to put our contribution from the point of view of the informal traders. So in order to talking regarding the right to the city, so Pilar would like to say, because we say something, so we are going to both be talking. So Maida, thank you very much. So good morning to all, good afternoon to all, or good evening. If I don't know what's your time, it's a great pleasure to know you. As Maida tell you, we're going to make a joint presentation. So it's a great pleasure to be here with you. So, start my presentation. We created this article from the point of view of the informal dwellers, or the informal salesmen here, or traders. StreetNet, we are a global network of organizations that from informal sellers in the that gathers more than 600,000 members of 52 countries. It was launched in Durban in November 2002, and StreetNet exists in order to promote regarding critical issues that these members actually face, and share strategies and organization of how to do advocacy, so that these vendors or informal vendors could actually have access to their right to work in the cities, and having also their labor rights assured. So Pilar, Now I'm going to present you a little bit of who is WIEGO. If you don't know WIEGO, because it is women in informal employment and organizing. And it is a global network. It's a network of networks mainly. So I'm going to explain how it's actually created. The main goal is to empower the poor workers of the informal economy and mainly women that are the biggest number of informal workers. One of the objective is to promote and ensure the sustainability of these people, because we think that all the workers should have the same opportunities and the same rights and the same protection and power of voice. The numbers show that how big is the size of this informal economy in the world. In 2018, the ILO gave these numbers. 61% of the workers in the world gain their life from the informal economies. These are 2 billion people of workers. That gives us the sizes of the informal economy and the importance for the global economy in the world. So our network is created by people and institutions from 3 broad sectors. One of our bases are the organizations based in memberships of these informal workers as cooperatives and labor unions. The second one would be researchers and statistics, and the third one are professionals of development agencies. So, what are the main things that we want to do? We want to increase the visibility and validity of these poor people, mainly women, and the harmonizations are involved in identifying, setting priorities and design of all our activities. They're involved in all our areas of our work. We actually communicate our findings of the cases and lessons learned related through the conversations and relations as we've got with the global platform to the right of the city. So, Maira, thank you. So, StreetNet is a member of WIEGO and it represent these guys of informal vendors, but we also work with workers of women working at home. Many people that work with recycling and always working with, we are partners, bringing the voice of the workers of the informal economy to discussion spaces. So hard is informal vendors. Sometimes we call them vendors of the public space when we talk about the right to the city. So we know that they gain their life selling their products in the streets of the city. We know that they are part of the big urban centers, mainly in countries with have a bigger unemployment rate. They are part of all the activities chain of all the activity. They are an important part of the people, the economy of the cities, and most of them are women, heads of homes, working for those to sustain, and they work day after per day. Something very common that we listen from these workers, that they work for during the day to eat at night. So, something the main issue when we talk about working in public spaces and the right to the city and the regulation of the use of the public space. So, the main issue is the municipality administrations do not authorize the work to work in the public space. They forbid to sell and they don't issue permits, and the permits are very little amount, very below the actual number of these informal vendors we've got in the city. So we've got the conflict of the right to this work. So they go hand by hand, the right to the city and the right to work. So the occupation of the public spaces for the development of economical activities and maintenance actually violate the rights. We see this photograph you must have seen. You see how people are taken out from their places and violence against the workers. What we would, the issue of the informal selling in the city should be seen from the point of view of public safety, not through a way in order to give actually access to work to these vulnerable populations. So we've got this photograph of this issue. You've got a photograph here of the conflict for the use of the space for working. So this is a tragedy of exclusion because the public power draws out, evicts the people from these spaces because they see that people without employee are treated as something that shouldn't be there, and because we're trying to work in order to obtain the substances means of living, and the violence of the struggle for the use of these territories, we see that the laws service a private interest, these laws that don't want to issue permits or that exclude people, that enable the policemen to exercise violence against these workers. That is a decision made by a few when the private interest is being expressed in urban policies so that for the city to be what only a couple of people want it to be. So the legitimate right of having a professional work to generate income from your family is criminalized against against the city because we know that this is something very similar with homes and when we see that people that make occupations for dwelling, and this it's important for these people to have the right to have to live in a dignified space, and because the city is being exclusive. The city is like a merchandise, and gain actually overruns the people. So the new urban agenda has been represented for us as a very important tool for our members, for our organized informal vendors to struggle and advocate the right to work because they actually advocate the right of the dwellers of the city to use, to occupy, to produce cities that are fair, inclusive, safe, democratic, to produce a dignified life. We actually want to use this space to generate sustainability, economical sustainability for their lives. And it's a city that should have a diversified and inclusive economies that assure the access to a safe means of life and decent work for the inhabitants, as stated by the agenda of the right to the city. Mainly the issue of the inclusive and participative citizenship management actually makes a lot of dispute because who could actually give and decide for a city that actually give these spaces for these kind of dwellers. Because when we hear these informal vendors, they want to pay a rate or be in a plan where anywhere. Well, what we want is in urban infrastructure to have better conditions of work because we say that people should have toilets, water, things that are very basic, so a space to eat, to heat your food, anything, something that in order to provide better working conditions. Who could decide for a city that the public spaces is there to be used for working? So we know that that's not the priority of the capital that wants that those territories from something else. So there is something an issue of doing a good participative citizen management of the spaces for production of the city. Pilar, so this part here, yes, I'm going to read it because we've got just a couple of minutes, so I'm going to try to be very fast. So the COVID taught us or showed us the situations for informal vendors in the public space. In the third expression of the AI law that was published in 2020, show that almost 1,600,000,000 people, that are 76% of the informal vendors or employment in the people, were impacted by the measures of confinement. And many of the cities actually closed all the financial activity, eliminated the possibility so that these people could gain the economical sustain. So you're asking for the next slide? Sorry, just a minute. So here we see what we did in COVID-19. We saw that the workers who had no right, no work. The pandemic was declared in March 2020, and she's freezed. Just a minute, please. Without social protection for the workers, because many of those workers are not acknowledged in the mind of the people. Many of the packages of social protection, they don't cover this kind of people. Police continue to harass them, lots of violence against these workers. The organizations of these vendors, they mobilized in the whole world in order to face the crisis and take solidarity actions and awareness, supporting their members, and started to try to do negotiation in order to show realistic solutions to the public authorities and how to assure the right to the city of those organizations. So what we are going to see how we started to see what were the pathways created by these organizations. This is an example of a set of pathways created in the whole world. This is an organization from El Salvador called Festives, and they showed how they, in their markets, how the authority could support them so that they could go their own market, so that people could go there in a safe manner, and they implemented. So please go and get into the detail. This I'm going to stop because I know that we've got only 1 minute. I want to show you now that what are the next. So we are now some other steps forward that we recommended. We said the right to the city should be in front and should be as a framework that would guide us when we talk about urban planification. The work, or in order to produce a city for all, we need to generate trust. and made it regarding the legal tools that they can use in their struggle and social participation. This is something that WIEGO and StreetNet in order to pass them all this information and those tools. So to include these informal vendors and workers so that they can set conversation with local government to build an inclusion dialogue. So next one. Then it will generate its bigger acknowledgement and inclusion in the inclusion of these informal vendors in our countries. And to close the report of human development of 2020 of the regarding development told the governments that now we are not in a moment for austerity. They are acknowledging that in that what we need to do is to invest, and we need to invest and assure that they invest in the grassroots, in the informal workers, that they are included and be part of these new plans to be followed, and the government should provide adequate packages so that these economies continue to fund, but formal economies are linked, deeply interlinked with these grassroots economies. And with that, we need to finish. The next one. So thank you very much to all brothers and sisters. And once again, Maira, for you, so that you can conclude. Sorry that we used a little bit, we stole a couple of minutes. Thank you, Pilar. Well, I think that this is a contribution for the debate. We are here for doubts and joint reflections for the debate. Thank you. Thank you very much, Maira and Pilar. We could continue here because at the end, this subject matter is essential. We could discuss the right to the city. Their article is very good and invite everybody to actually would like to know more regarding the article that they actually signed of other colleagues from StreetNet and WIEGO. This article is published in the Clarkson workbook that we are going to put here in the chat, that you can actually download it, that has got text in Spanish and Portuguese as well. Then we are going to have 2 or 3 rounds of Q&A. So I expect that we are going to have opportunity for dialogue a little bit with you regarding this. So now we are going to Sofia Bonilla, that is part of the Lab of Public Space of Glasswing International. Elvia Sofia will show you a reflection on the public space in the public spaces in times of COVID or for the pandemic, and what is possible and necessary regarding in order to improve the public space based on the experience of San Salvador. So thank you very much, Elvia Sofia. You've got 15 minutes. Okay, thank you very much, Claxo, under the platform, Gloria, for the right of the city, for the opportunity to participate in this webinar. I'm going to share my screen right now. Let me see if I can do it. Can you see my screen? Yes. So then now the issue of the document that we present from our lab of public spaces is close to improve the public space in terms of pandemic. It's not only possible but necessary. So we've been working all this issue of public space with big and mid and small intervention, but in these cases it's very important the reflections, because reflections appear from this context of the pandemic with COVID. So I want to tell you a little bit who we are. We are the Glasswing International Foundation, and we are within the product that's called Imagine the City That We Want. Imagina la ciudad que queremos from USAID and Foundation Howard Buffett that to regenerate public spaces with a focus on safety and violence prevention. And the lab of the public spaces, imagine what we do is actually to have a place to experimentation and registrations and analysis of the data of the process in the end to share lessons learned and information, knowledge, and with that actually help in the advocacy in the issue of public spaces in different platforms. So, I want to tell you a little bit. This is Parque Cuscatlán is one of the areas we've made intervention through the Imagina program. So, a little bit of context. So, we create these public spaces during the pandemic. So, in 2020, we know that in the whole world, the pandemic brought this confinement, but for many months and restrictions, and the idea was positive to have to stop that virus that causes death, of course. But other collateral effects, for example, other pressures they were not taken care, as depression, violence in confined pressure, loss of economies, loss of workplaces. And we know the populations that live in exclusion and poverty are those that have the hardest pathway in order to face the pandemic because they don't have access to good sweet water, have no money in order to buy things as, for example, the masks. And they've got living spaces when it's impossible to maintain social distances. So a little bit more of the context. Now, seeing in this situation was very clear that the focus of safety and prevention of violence was very important. That in different platforms is something that we discuss a lot in the country. So that we needed to be more radical here, more imperative, talking about the issue of the rights, because and the public spaces gives us the possibility to have access to your rights. In order to intervene in the spaces, we needed logistic spaces, mainly by the community teams of Glasswing, and that make the links between the foundation with the communities of the neighborhoods where we do our interventions. What are the challenges we needed to face? First, everybody was afraid, and the fear is real. The virus is real. People die. I think everybody knows someone that passed away. Oh, so our focus of being very participative then requires a lot of presential participation, and we started to do online works, and we saw that many of those people we wanted to work with don't have electricity, they don't have smartphones, computers, so we needed to invest more in telephone calls for the consultation, lots of work through telephone. So, what are the reflection after intervention? This is a couple of photographs, main photographs. The idea is that to make an intervention in a public spaces enables you to activate the network in a place or in a moment of crisis. These are the two communities, Papini and Santa Lucia. This is a typical community or how the neighborhoods, they are neighborhoods from the time of the 60s that were being informal settlement and started to formalize with time passing by. They are on the outskirts of the historical center of San Salvador. They were marginalized for infrastructure with water, electricity, accessibility, and other goods and services. For you to have an idea of what we're talking about, And within the pandemic, we've made some measurements in order to understand better how these people were. And we know that most of the people living there, they are independent workers in the informal industry. And with the pandemic, 4 from 10 lost their jobs. So during the confinement, they told us that they diminished the amount and variety of their food because they haven't got the money to buy and they couldn't go to buy, and they expended all their savings in their basic needs. Another important is that the task at home on home task actually increased, so you had no resting time. Just got a couple of little problems with the slides. Just a minute. Okay. So what did we do with those communities? Oh, we work the public spaces with low cost intervention that actually provide good impact. Of course, we would love to have beautiful parks as the one that I showed you in my first slides. But when you go in these communities with these characteristics, we started with these high impact, low cost intervention. Cleaning dams, there are lots of corners or pieces of land that maybe those lands may had owners, but they were left over. And we see the photograph that's one of the, it was turned a kind of a dump in the middle of the community. So when we clean those spaces with the community, with the contribution of the city hall, enables us to create little spaces that start to serve and function as public spaces with more forming small pocket parks and squares. You see this corner here, and at the right, you see how it was when we pulled those flower beds. What other things we did? We restored as well points that were important for the identity of the community. You see the prior and after here on the door, we've got the good of Santa Lucia. That's very important for that image for the community. So now we've closed a little roof for some plants, and it's a gathering point. It's not only an open space, more things can be done there now. They can celebrate birthdays, and it's a space that's good for the community for different kinds of gathering, or sometimes that may be a funeral. The families of the deceased did the funeral there. Below, we've got, there was an entry of the almendros, entry of the almonds. You see, it was a place where the bikes stopped there, the motorbikes, people there. In a certain moment, there were people planted these 2 almond plants, and that gave a good potential. Is like the pathway to the formal part. So it's very important. We negotiated that people should not park their motorbikes there in order to convert in an entry square to the community. And you see the photograph at the right. We pulled a little bit of furniture. We paint some messages on the walls regarding the Kutzkaklan Park. That's not far away from there. And the places for children to play. So that spaces that was there was more now it's now more suitable for the purpose. And we also painted things on the floor and walls in order for the pride of the community, because a lots of stigmas that between these guys are poor informal criminals, and suddenly it happens. I think that is also true, but we need to strengthen the acknowledgement and pride of the community, because lots of good stories that are shared and people are very pride of being the neighbors of that neighborhood. So we painted the facades and floors and walls of things regarding the community. I would like had, for example, the hen, children playing, vegetation, because in the middle of the tropics, so we've got lots of vegetation. Color is also very strong. Another of the walls that we painted, this is the Santa Lucia wall, we call it the community gallery. And if you see the images of real people that live in the community, so the community decided who was going to be painted there because they found it would be for some old man that passed away. There was a leader, we've got girls, women, we've got men and women and children. So we've got this an indication. This is Mr. Federico, the story of why he's important for the community. And each one of those faces has a description, and the community can see themselves reflected and answered through these contributions. And we want them with lots of color and joy, because of the COVID has been sad enough. So we want to fight and the idea, give an idea of joy and combat the stigma. And this wall is very long. On the other side, you've got a bus terminal. So it's not an active place all now. And now it's very interesting because we've got this gallery, and also on the floor, the children can play because our game's on the floor, painted on the floor. What else is? We made these vegetation beds in order to put some green to the communities. This is quite concrete. It's concrete, so that nature will bring more life and lets the space more like fresher. And we created workers of urban orchards. We are also sowing veggies, some vegetables. So we've got some plants with the beds or flower pots, and people take care. Another reflection about the integration was this public space is a platform of access to the rights. We shouldn't see the public space just as an engineering work. The most important thing is transforming in a gathering point, because if people go there and gather there, that space gains value. We need to respect it, and we want to share it, and we think that these gathering spaces actually enable rights and improve life quality. We always talk that maybe governments invest in a hospital clinic. That's very nice, okay. But if the community has no way to connect themselves and even to cross the street, it's worthless to have that hospital or that right, how that they are trying to implement in order that the government is trying to do. If there are people that live in at the side, marginalized from the city. So we need to create these connections that enable you to have access and actually have access to goods and services. And this enables the persons and visitors to the city to gather here everything they need to live. Another reflection, the public space reduces the inequality breaches and differences. San Salvador has a lot of Latin America as a whole. They are the most unequal places of the world. We stated, the United Nations stated it out well, and having all these urban places so unequal, I think it's very important to invest in connections and accesses in public spaces so that can connect you to the rest that it functions in the city. We knew through the pandemic there was lots of confinement, and the public spaces were enabled to help neighborhoods that are handicapped or needs special needs, access to work, basic baskets, taking care of children or people with some that could be handicapped, places to actually to share problems and react to violent situations. That has already been measured, that we have had lots of we had home violence, and sometimes come out to the public space could save your life. So helps us, who gives us goods and services in a more equal way within the pandemic and out of the pandemic. And 2 minutes, okay. Yeah, I'm almost finishing. Acupuncture that we do say the rehabilitation of the public space have multiplication effects even when it is degraded and in the pandemic. That's a case of this Delgada Street in the center. We made an intervention of 200 meters, connected the micro center and some of the squares very famous of the San Salvador with a market ex-quartel. And this is a place of degradation. Some buildings are abandoned and lots of informal trade in the public space. So what did we do? Well, we painted walls and floors. The design was done through participative workshops with dwellers, and the subject matters are the vendor woman and the independent worker and women head of family. We organized that with workers from the area. What are the results? So we've made a measurement 4 months afterwards. I'm going to share with you some of the results. There's a sensation of better wellness because it was considered a danger zone that is now there's more in perception of safety, an idea of belonging. I think among themselves, they say rapes, I actually say if someone doesn't clean, one will actually take care of the space because it's theirs. They cause the vocation of walking street because with this and gives a message of hope and new cultural gatherings because we open a cultural space that's called Nave Ciber Metro, and it's because it's colorful. People that would not come here now they want to go, so they brought the eyes of many people, mainly from the government, from the local government, on this area of the city that people didn't want to see it because it was dirt and poor. But it's got lots of things to offer. And the last thing, it's very important, the strength of the citizen organization. This is something very important in our process. Everything needs to be participative. And it has been very important that people don't see as beneficiaries, but they've got this, they turn themselves as protagonists and participants. So regardless of COVID, they showed a great commitment from the dwellers and workers on the places we intervened. They supported it, and their support was very important for all these to be important. We also we asked support from the private industry, but they cut it. So the important thing was the collaboration of the dwellers and the people we intervened. So finally, to regenerate the public space was only a pretext because the public spaces actually talks about social multiplying effects, the dwellers, cohesions, strengthening of the networks, all these feelings of joy in the environment. So at the end of the day, this is actually to advocate for the right of to the city. And with this, I finish. Thank you very much for this possibility. Thank you for you, Sofia. It's been a great pleasure. And now, not only for this presentation, because also for all the experience that this is a very important dimension of this work that you can actually find in the Glasswing workshop, that are experiences, concrete experiences based on which then we make reflections on the right to the city. Thank you very much for your work. See, I think we're going to have some opportunity for some reflections in the next round. Remind you, for the youth that have questions, doubts, comments, please share them in the chat, and our team is organizing everything for this second one. So now we are going to have the great pleasure to listen to Luisa Bravo, that she is part of Journal of Public Spaces. Luisa is working as a consultant of the Global Platform for the Right to the City, namely on this issue of urbans and human settlements with quality public spaces. This is one component of what we understand as the right to the city. There are other companies that I have already mentioned from this work that we are developing in our thematic papers. Luisa is going to make her presentation in English, so will please, on the bottom, the Zoom screen, you've got the possibility of choosing the translation into Spanish. So please, those of you that prefer to listen in Spanish, go and select it. So Luisa,
for your presentation, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Henrique, and thank you for the invitation today to share my my work on public space, especially for this thematic paper. I'm glad to have the opportunity today to speak, because I see that there is a very large South American audience. So it's interesting then to share reflections in the end and ask for comments and feedbacks also to the audience. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen now. Do you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thanks. So as you know, I'm working on this thematic paper from these great compilation of documents related to the right to the city that are promoted by GLAXO and the Global Platform for the Right to the City. I've been working on public space now for more than 10 years, and 5 years ago I founded the Journal of Public Space that I'm currently leading as editor-in-chief. And the Journal of Public Space is the first academic interdisciplinary open access journal entirely dedicated to public space that we are developing in cooperation with the UN Habitat, the United Nations Human Settlements Program. So contents are free to download. Just go to journalpublicspace.org. Today I have prepared an overview regarding what public space is and how we should frame a public space in a global perspective and in relation to actions of national, regional, and local governments. So I would like to start with some definition, because you won't believe this, but actually what is public space is the most common questions that people usually ask me. So here I have included some definitions of public space. Public space is the crucial instrument to promote a human-oriented approach, since it is a key enabler of human rights, empowering women, providing opportunities for youth, improving equity, safety, and security, and promoting inclusion and democracy. Public space is a common good. It is the glue that can contribute to improving mutual trust, cooperation, and solidarity among human beings, overcoming diversity and social status. I'm an urban designer, so I'm also interested in how public space is designed and managed. So well-designed and well-managed public spaces, such as streets, squares, green spaces, markets, and other public facilities. So public space is not just an outdoor space, it is also an indoor space. can provide opportunities for both formal and informal economy, attracting investments, entrepreneurs and services, enhancing the value of land and of real estate properties, redefining urban environments with human vibrancy and livelihood, encouraging walking, cycling, and plein air play, improving our physical and mental health. So according to this definition, public space is really a key component for sustainable urban development. The concept of public space is very broad. It's a cross-disciplinary concept. It doesn't belong just to architecture and urban design, but it belongs to many different aspects of the design and management of cities. And it is very important to highlight this aspect. It is very context dependent. So every context is different. So public space is always very different. According to the Charter of Public Space, that's another definition. Public spaces are all places publicly owned or for public use, accessible and enjoyable by all, free and without a profit motive. Public spaces consist of open environments, streets, sidewalks, squares, gardens, parks, and sheltered spaces created without a profit motive and for everyone's enjoyment. So public libraries, museums, closed markets, etc. And as you know, public space is also part of the new urban agenda adopted in Quito at the Habitat 3 conference. The new urban agenda is this action-oriented document which is setting these global standards for sustainable development. And it is important that public space is part of the strategic development of cities since it's a crucial component to foster civic identity and social cohesion, following the UN imperative to leave no one behind. And of course, the new urban agenda is also defining somehow public space as well. In the paragraph 37, we commit ourselves to promoting safe, inclusive, accessible, green and quality public spaces, including streets, sidewalks, cycling lanes, squares, waterfront areas, gardens and parks that are multifunctional areas for social interaction and inclusion, human health and well-being, economic exchange, cultural expression and dialogue among a wide diversity of people and cultures, and that are designed and managed to ensure human development and build peaceful, inclusive and participatory societies, as well as to promote living together, connectivity and social inclusion. So public space is crucial to define quality of life of people living in cities in order to actually redefine a way of understanding the built environment and the way to design it. So focusing on spaces where human beings live and interact, share their own beliefs, face conflicts, misunderstandings, but try to cooperate for better living. And in the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, public space is actually included as SDG 11 and as a specific target and another specific indicator. I'm not reading here because I guess you know about this. I would like to highlight that the public space is not just about SDG 11, which is make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. But it is strategic also in relation to other components of the Agenda for Sustainable Development, for example, SDG 3, good health and well-being, and SDG 10, reduced inequalities, also SDG 8, related to balancing resources and investments for economic growth, also SDG 5 for gender equality. And also in regard to the Paris Agreement, we can say SDG 13 on climate action in terms of mitigation and adaptation. So just to have this, global perspective related to public space, I think it is important to actually understand why public space is important and why we should foster this human-oriented approach to cities. Because we are usually focusing on public space cultural richness, identity, and diversity, but in our contemporary times, public space is more and more addressing inequalities, poverty, and conflicts as a result of rampant urbanization, top-down decision-making processes that are guided by economic issues, huge real estate investments, and privatization trends. In particular, the increasingly privatized public domain and the lack of facilities to fully access, live, and enjoy public space often isolate communities, limiting their freedom to engage the public sphere. And in the global south, or also in the post-conflict regions or divided territories, where people live in inadequate conditions and in extreme poverty. And so public space serves as an extension of small living environments, and also is the space where children can find some play spaces, and public space can also host informal economic activities along the streets and sidewalks. In our contemporary society, we are experiencing also conditions of social injustice and economic inequality. So people are reclaiming actually their rights, democratic rights. They protest for political issues, struggle to preserve the uniqueness of specific places, push governments on urgent questions such as unemployment, affordable housing, human dignity, political corruption, and economic default. Discrimination and violence in public space are more and more generated by the co-presence of different social groups, fueled by intolerance and incapability to accept the others. So extreme poverty and homelessness have generated hostile design solutions, especially in privately owned public spaces, keeping out the unwanted publics, namely the most vulnerable populations, discouraging public presence and use. According to recent estimations, about 79% people in New York are homeless. In Brazil, more than 100,000 people live on the street, and 11.4 million people live in slums. In many countries, sexual violence is affecting the way women and girls move in the urban and rural context in their daily routines. The perception of insecurity and the fear to be harassed in a male-designed public space is limiting women's right to the city. And UN Women has been working for 10 years, developing a multi-stakeholder global initiative, working with women's organizations, local and national governments, and UN agencies to highlight how unwanted sexual remarks and gestures happening in the streets, public transportation, schools, workplaces, parks, water and food distribution sites significantly reduce the ability of women to participate in public life, thus affecting also their health and well-being. What about then the right to the city in relation to public space? I would like to cite here the Barcelona Declaration on Public Space that was signed during the Habitat 3 thematic meeting on April 2016. In the declaration, it is clearly written that the right to the city is a new paradigm that provides an alternative framework to rethink cities and urbanization. So it's a completely new mindset built around public space. Also, I like to cite David Harvey, that probably you know, because his work on the right to the city is really extremely important. He says that the freedom to make and remake our cities and ourselves is one of the most precious yet most neglected of our human rights. And this is extremely important because it deals with individual liberty and the opportunity to be yourself and express yourself in the public domain, also by changing the city. And also Harvey points out that this right to the city is more than individual liberty to access urban resources. It is a right to change ourselves by changing the city. But what is the problem of public space that I think is actually part of the global discussion around public space is the lack of a strong implementation. So lack of, let's say, ability, interest or expertise by local government in investing in citywide public space strategies. So public space is a low priority in many cities' urban agenda. So unless all the efforts, despite the efforts and a lot of amazing work that have been developed in the past decades and are still part of the global discussion on public space, investment is in public space is an undervalued task for many local governments. I would like now to share some images just to visualize what the public space actually can be through the engagement, for example, of local community and local experts, let's say, that are very proactive in defining conditions for public space to answer to specific needs and desires of local populations. There is also, yes, 2 minutes.
2 more minutes, yes. Thank you.
Okay, good. There is, of course, an effort by some cities to actually invest on top-down design that is putting at the center public space. We have many examples like this one, and we do not. It is important that we do not forget that the public space must be accessible by everyone. And so the idea to work on universal design is also crucial to actually understand how humans can live, enjoy, interact, and share and cooperate in the public domain. There are also some very nice examples of co-design, engaging from the bottom up, engaging local community, or co-creation by defining the conditions for public space to flourish, or appropriation of public space through daily activities defined by urban users. And of course, inclusion, since we need to think about our societies that are more and more intergenerational and multicultural. So inclusion also in regard of vulnerable groups and minorities is extremely important. For children, it is important to provide spaces for play and to give them the opportunity to fully enjoy the outdoor domain. But public space is also part of creative interventions and imagination through the work of artists and activists, or creative reuse of abandoned, underused space that were not designed to be public spaces, or by redesigning leftover space in order to play as public spaces. And of course, the idea of collecting innermost emotions and desires by the community is part of the activity that a public space strategy should put into consideration. I would like just to give, I will be very brief, idea of what we have been doing at the Journal of Public Space during the COVID-19 pandemic. I like to think that the pandemic finally make everyone on the planet understand the importance of public space, because we were actually living far away from the public domain, stuck at home and looking at the public space from behind the window. What happened in order to recover from the pandemic? At first, adaptation, and people wanted to go out, but feel safe at the same time. So these circles in the grass started in the US and then were hugely applied in many other cities. Also, the idea of use very cheap and easy way to redefine spaces for social interaction. There is this nice Instagram account on tape measures that is telling you how you can create conditions for social distancing. Also expanding public space through temporary interventions. This is a parklet that I designed in the city of Bologna in Italy, where I'm based. As a reaction to the restriction imposed by the Italian government, while the discussion of the one-minute city in Stockholm through the creation of parklets is still ongoing, and the most recent one is on the 15-minute city, which means creating conditions for people to appreciate all facilities and services close to the place where they live and promote hyper proximity. During the pandemic, with the Journal of Public Space, we launched this initiative, 2020, a year without public space under the COVID-19 pandemic. We organized 20 webinars from May to September 2020, covering a lot of topics related to public space, engaging a lot of speakers and academic and cultural institutions. We also organized a final symposium, today's symposium, in November. And this was the impact of the initiative. We had more than 2,700 attendees from more than 80 countries. You can see also age and gender balance here. We also published a special issue of the Journal of Public Space entirely dedicated to the pandemic. And regarding the right to the city, with the Journal of Public Space, we are currently working with World Blind Union on a special issue on universally accessible public spaces for all. This is included in the Abu Dhabi declared actions from the 10th World Urban Forum. The issue will be published next year and launched at the 11th World Urban Forum in Katowice, Poland, in June 2022. So thank you for your attention, and please visit the Journal of Public Space and read the contents. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luisa, for this great presentation. It was wonderful, the examples you brought to us. I think you have made many links with the two previous presentations, and just remind everyone that Luisa is doing a wonderful work as a consultant of the global platform for the right to the city on the theme of public spaces, right to the city and public spaces. Bien, ahora voy a cambiar para el...
So, switching into Spanish back again, and now we go to the second moment of our webinar when we are going to have discussion rounds. So I invite you to put your doubts, questions, so forth in the chat in our virtual room. And while we organize the second moment with your questions, I'm going to talk and spread this workbook initiative from Glaxo jointly with the global platform for the right to the city. This workbook specifically has as main subject the right to the city in face of the current challenges, and I would like to thank mainly the Glaxo team that's the source of the initiative of this workbook, mainly Luis Bonilla, that actually coordinates all the series of workbooks. Pablo Romero, that also is a member of Glaxo, participated in the editorial commission, and our dear Manuel Damer Guardia, that's a coordinator of the working group of urban inequalities from Glaxo. And Manuel, I think, is somewhere here. I would like to give him a couple of minutes of presentation on this Glaxo initiative and the working group. Please. Okay, thank you very much, Henrique. And yes, you can hear me, can't you? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So it's a great pleasure. I've been taking notes during all the session. The session has been fantastic. Having a session in Spanish, Portuguese, English is not normal. That has been very enriching. As I told you, this is an initiative of many different people from different efforts, jointly efforts, headed by Luis Bonilla. That is actually the responsible for the success, of course, supported by us. And the organization of these activities are actually coming very well, and we've got 3 more to do. So I want to tell you that the working groups from Glaxo is this initiative that is trying to create a space for exchange with different players to discuss urgencies, issues in the Latin American cities. Please go and watch the document. I think it's come out very good. Of course, it's got more 250 pages, more or less like that. But that's it. But the quality, it's amazing. So I wanted just to tell you all that. I've got lots of questions I'm going to put through the chat to the presenters. So thank you very much, Henrique. Thank you to you, Martin, and all the Glaxo team for this wonderful work. So now we can continue past the second moment of our discussion. I think that Luisa has got a couple of questions to trigger some questions from this one. So Luisa, would you like to share your questions?
Sí, gracias, Enrique.
Yes, Enrique.
Okay.
I hope it's not a problem for the translators. Sorry, but I do not speak Spanish. I know I have to learn because I'm Italian, so I'm supposed to. Well, I can understand and I listen Spanish, but I do not speak. So unfortunately, it's in English. Okay, so in my presentation, in 15 minutes, it's very difficult to cover all the complexity of public space and also to give a clear overview of what the rights to the city is about when we talk about quality public spaces. But there is a specific aspect that I would like to highlight now with the audience, and I hope to get very nice feedbacks. I'm very interested in understanding this activity of co-design and co-creation, participation, and sharing of values, meanings, and later also responsibilities in terms of public space design and management. I'm also from a non-profit organization. Actually, the Journal of Public Space is published by a non-profit organization, which I think is the strength of the journal, that is coming from a civil society organization. So I'm interested to, also in my research activities, to understand the mechanism and how this way of engaging the community from the bottom up into the decision-making process, also in regard of definition of public policies, is actually creating a kind of new economy. Because, the top-down planning process is mostly related to, let's say, capitalism approach, while this bottom-up, inclusive, proactive, human-oriented approach is actually defining social innovation, that it is also dealing with economic issues. And the participation of these groups, informal groups, and self-organized citizens is acting through small in scale, lighter, quicker, cheaper, place-making interventions. They are called in many different names, but they are able to really change the environment and really turn an underused, neglected, dirty and ugly space into a place for the community. In 2016, the International Architecture Biennale in Rotterdam was actually entitled The New Economy, and was including a lot of projects showing how this new coalition of individuals and collectives are stepping in when the government is absent. And so they are reclaiming public space in a kind of, let's say, revolution. Local governments are trying to cope with this force, really powerful force that is coming from the bottom up, and it is dealing with these people that are actually experts at the local level. They exactly know what to do, how to design, what kind of implementation it is necessarily in which specific areas. So they are creative. They also engage private sector with social enterprises, and they create these creative and informal practices. So I'm interested, since previous examples were actually defining this dimension of public spaces that is very much related to local communities. So I would be interested to get some feedbacks from the speakers and from the audience regarding how to actually reinforce this powerful force that we saw was crucial also during the COVID-19 pandemic. While governments were dealing with the major concerns regarding health crisis and economic crisis, public space was more and more appropriated and activated by local communities. Is there a way, this is the question, sorry for the long introduction, is there a way to actually empower these local communities, not to do what they are already doing, which is amazing, but to empower them to become critical agents of change in the decision-making process, and how they can actually take some power from the local government and later also responsibility, because empowerment to me means that the local government is transferring a part of the power on public space to these local communities. So is this the case, for example, in Latin America? Because in Italy and in Europe, there are so many examples of placemaking, tactical interventions, but I don't see those activities as part of a clear strategy, let's say citywide public space strategy, or a real political mandate of local governments. It is something that is happening, which is good for the community, something that local governments are endorsing, but there is not a specific effort in strengthening the efforts in defining public space as a priority. I hope it is clear.
Muchas gracias, Luisa. Sí, está
Thank you, Luisa. It's very clear, absolutely. See, I'm going to go back to Sofia, Maira, and Pilar, asking her to comment that issue on what are the challenges to involve the people that are in the territories, on the grassroots, neighborhoods, dwellers, but also workers, informal workers, people that are living in the streets because of they are informal vendors. But one of the challenges that you face from this idea that the important things is that those people participate actively in these processes and also share their perspectives in order to have a quality public space. I'm going to add to that the comment and question for Manuel that is the following. An interesting question that is the following. Manuel comments, no doubt the pandemic plays public space and the activities in the public space, as for example, the informal trade, in the center of the discussion in many different moments. However, I've got the sensation that the initial discussion during the pandemic, we started to lose space, and it seems that we are going back to the previous situation, but with more inequalities and access problems and new ways of exclusion. I would like to ask, how would you assess that situation, or whether you think it's possible to identify some positive aspect from the public discussion on public space and informal trade in this situation we're used to. Of course, I would have that same question like Manuel had, because we see here in Brazil lots of cities like São Paulo, for example, that it is discussing the role of the public spaces to reactivation of economies, but within a scope of reactivation of the formal economy, so restaurants, formal trade, and they are not thinking about in the informal vendors. And they are actually like giving free public space to restaurants so that they can occupy away in a kind of privatization of the sidewalks of the public space, because they broaden the space that should be a public space. So I would have a comment similar to Manuel. How are you seeing this moment? Are we advancing in the discussion regarding the democratization of public space, or we are going back to the same problems that we had of exclusion and inequalities? And a third comment from Ramon Bocada. Thank you very much, Ramon, for commenting that that's one problem for the conservation of the public spaces is the pressure of the private sector and some politicians in order to convert them in real estate spaces, because they think that it's a loss of money to leave free all that space that have in squares and parks. Public space is area of unproductive land. That's what Ramon Moncada is telling us. So I would like you to give back with those questions for you, what Luisa says, what Manuel, and also Ramon, to comment on that in order to listen a little bit more, Maira, Pilar, and Sofia. Who would like to get started? Yes, I can do it. Yes, thank you, Henrique. Thank you to all of you that place your questions. So what I was thinking while Luisa was talking about the bottom-up approach, or social participation or community, bringing this to the issue of the informal vendors. And I was thinking, I brought here some experiences of a social participation, that as we work with informal vendors, but they are players of the city, but they are also workers. So we've got this perspective of the working class and the struggle of the urban moments for the right of the city. From the point of view of the work is what would be the negotiation tables where we can talk with who defines the working conditions. So we are working there on the negotiation with the public power for the right to work. So there's no harassment against these people. And this is a negotiation with the municipalities, city hosts. When we talk about social security, then we're talking about more with the national governments. So when there are some experiences, we've got an experience in São Paulo from the beginning of the 90s, when there was a municipal law that was launched for a government that was aligned with the workers, created commissions, regional commissions of this informal trading. And we had representatives of the organizations, representatives of the formal traders, NGOs, we had the police, and we had the municipal public power. And then we were talking, would we be the places for this informal trading, or this, whether it's a very good economical condition for them to trade that could be planned, that should not harm the circulation of people. Sorry for that. And they talked about, how can I say, the use of public space for working. Of course, the political strength of the formal trade and policemen was stronger than the others, but there was a conflict there. Discussions, and sometimes we could negotiate public spaces for these vendors or this trade, and that was the inspiration for a law in India. India, after 20 years of public discussion of these kind of settings, they managed to foresee commissions of these informal traders in each city in India. That comes top down from as a national policy for the local governments, where people can discuss the use of public space and the approaches of about the infrastructure, audits, and that's the way how you can involve all the actors that actually live for the livelihoods of the public space, and having a space also of discussing all this with the private interest, but we assure the participation and discussion with the grassroots of the country, with these people. Thank you, Naida. Pilar, please. Thank you, Enrique. I would like to compliment a little bit the answer of Maira, and also to talk about the answers that Manuel has placed on the other side, on how the organizations of informal retailers actually occupied the spaces that government have not occupied. And we saw, for example, I've placed a link there that I want to talk about, that it is a collection of best practices that during the pandemic, the informal vendors organizations actually picked up the situation by themselves and showed us the way forward in places where the government should have done that mitigation on how to enable that these people could continue to work, because they don't have access to packages of social protection. They were obliged to do that. In many places, these workers were placed as essential working, but without protection. In that sense, that kind of situation shows how the informal traders saw those that they filling the spaces that the government left without infrastructure or someone in charge of to show the way forward. That is where the bases show how the situation could be handled with, and then they bring us partners, the government, so that they continue to support them. Please go and have a look at that link of those examples or the best practices, or the ways forwards that are good lessons on how, if we include the informal lessons from the very beginning, and they are part of and that is part of what WIEGO doing with StreetNet, is to empower those people with knowledge, also that they can actually sit down in negotiation tables with the governments. Because if you ask what tools do they have, those tools that we're talking about, the new urban agenda, the SDGs, all the goals of sustainable development, or the agenda of the right to the city, all those are important tools. But if they don't come and they are in their hands, in the knowledge by the informal workers, so that they can actually advocate and they could actually sit down at the table and be empowered with that knowledge, all the tools are useless because people are not using them. So what we do is actually we can help them, but those changes should come from the grassroots, and that's a work that we are doing we're working every day life is to pass those knowledges, and we're training those workers in negotiations and empowerment. And another thing that I want to tell you, Manuel said about the economies of our countries were affected so huge with the containment measures. The private capitals, as I tried to do, took advantage, like try to use these public spaces in order for restaurants and the business, private business. And sadly, many informal workers that were willing before using those spaces, they were were all affected. So that is something that we've been actually advocating for. That they say do no harm to the gains obtained prior, because what you were saying is been very good. We've given one step forwards and 10 steps back, and sadly that is the current situation where we're trying to avoid to lose the gains of that. One example of that was the situation what happened in Colombia. In Colombia, where we talked and we decided the presentation, we saw that the government, international governments, they said this is not a moment for austerity. An example of Colombia showed why not. It was they create a tax reform affecting mainly the informal workers, the poor people with reforms where actually everything would be taxed. What happened in that moment that the informal workers organized with the unions were a very important part of the movement for change, and tell a stop to the government to say this is not a moment for austerity, because of what you said, Manuel. So thank you very much for that question. I wanted to actually to give you that example to show you that how important it is to empower people, the workers, with knowledges, and it's important that they could sit on the table with the government with the private sector as well, and the workers mainly, in order to bring changes that are significant and inclusive for all. I give the word to Henrique back again. Thank you very much, Luisa, Immanuel. Thank you, Pilar, for these comments. I'm going to add here that Elsa Perez from the Social Environmental Lab in Mexico, she shares a link of this lab, and she says that from the perspective of this group, they acknowledge the importance of strengthening the social infrastructure to face the situation of COVID, and continues with advocacy for structural changes bottom up. And that the social environmental narratives or the historical memory, music actually contributed a lot. Thank you, Elsa, for sharing with us all these comments. Now give us to Sofia, and then Sofia could dive a little bit more in this experience from San Salvador of what is asking Luisa Bravo, and explain us how this work that you did in San Salvador, how the dwellers participated, what were the challenges in your presentation. You comment a little bit, if you could actually elaborate a little bit more on that, Sofia, would be very interesting to listen more about your experience. Okay, many different questions or reflection, very interesting contribution. There's a lot of things to say. I'm aligned with my colleagues Maira and Pilar, but I would like to add a couple of ideas. listening to the question, you are talking about empowering power, who's got more power. All that is true. It's a reality that every group has that power. We are going to face in different kind of powers within the cities and within the societies. But I would like to should think about the meaning of power. And when we talk about the public sector and government, we're thinking about structures of republic. They've got state powers, executive powers of all legislative power. And I think that is a reality. It's very important. But in context like San Salvador and Latin America and the global south, this is a reality like different from the reality that live other people. Maybe the government could have good intention, creates a good infrastructure, beautiful policies, but it doesn't translate to the everyday life of the grassroots of the country. Most of the people are interested in to maintain the life of their day and maintain the life of their family. That's why they work in order to bring the livelihood of their family. That's what's been seen in the discussion. So, what kind of power do you have? We see what different scales we should measure the powers. So we could see the structure of the republics that we do have them, but for most of the people, they do not exist. Maybe they're not important for these people. In Glasswing, the foundation I work with has invested in the updated in the policies for. We had made a beautiful document, but very little amount of people know it. Some city mayors, some technicians, and for that to be a reality, we need a lot of effort. So we need to think about the importance of the powerful for what. And the most important is, I think that COVID, with the confinement and the threat to life, things us understand the most important thing is life. So being jointly with the community should be seen from a horizontal way, looking about life. And in our program, as I told you, it's for us, it's very important the teams that make the social connections, that are the social workers that live in the communities, or they have a direct contact and they are friends of the people, because at the end of the day it's because they go to have lunch together, they tell their own stories, they hug each other, and that makes empower more, the giving power empower these processes. And some phrases that we told a lot I would like to share with you is, sometimes you need to challenge your thoughts. We don't want to create a beautiful space, the best design. That is also important. But the most important thing is from the backstage go, because in the backstage, it means we've included everybody. So the public space is being pushed by the society. We are just a support platform so that they could have access for the minimal things that they need for their life. And in order to have a minimum life quality for each of those families and communities and their environment. So I'm very interested in that small scale, because it's very important to see the big scale, and we've got players from government and society, but we understand the small scale because we need to see those that are excluded. And I think it was mentioned, Luisa mentioned it, that sometimes the city was designed for one man, middle class, white, Caucasian, that works in the formal, who is excluded. So children and handicapped or people that are vulnerable because of some some handicapped, or because they are from LGBTQA plus, indigenous people, or people that came out from jail. It's a very, it's almost impossible to get back into the society. So all those people, we would like to give. We would like this public space to embrace of those people. What else? The role of a public space for activating the economy is so. If we could, we can. The public space is profitable when you've got quality public space. Of course, the whole environment is good for the economic, for the environment, for the society, for everybody, and economy as well. And actually, quality public space actually makes the environment more attractive. So even produces economically results. So if we want to take from someone, take public space from the cars, for example. The streets are part of the public space, as we know. The shared spaces of gathering and circulation. I think we should take out space from the cars more for pedestrians, for more a human scale, and would be like, in order to compact the society, do it smaller so that you don't need to have use the car. What else? Cases, because you've mentioned so many things. What else? The importance of the public space in the pandemic is very clear. We need a public space, and the issue of housing, that's something that we discuss a lot. There are many lack of housing in the whole world, and Latin America is leading the problems. It's very difficult to invest in social housing, so we could bet in. So we do not have the capacity of creating the houses that we would like. Let us have at least a minimum space, but let us put shared public spaces that are shared, big enough that if I'm living in the 10th floor of a building, at least the corridors should be broad enough so that children could go and take some air in these tropical countries, or do some shared activities, talk with your neighbor, do other things. It's like, yes, betting more to the public space could activate reflexes in order to rethink the way we do our cities and change our paradigms, and think about public and private space as well. What else? Generally, I think that the COVID gives us this reflex that the most important thing is life. And if we put life in center, we can then start to think and act in a different way. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Sofia. So we are done in terms of the time is gone from the webinar. So I'm going to read the comments on Kelly. That is something, is a consultant from the Global Platform for the Right to the City in this thematic document that she's working the issue of inclusive city, and she comments that she's been thinking and reflecting about co-production of public spaces, and she places some questions that would be, until when I should incentive the participation of the citizen or transfer part of the government role. Think a little bit about what is the limit, where is the responsibility of the government, and where is the neoliberalism the one will take part, because the governments are transferring their responsibility to these liberals. And another question is how to assure that the citizens could participate and are protagonists. but without being overloaded with all the responsibility of producing, maintaining the public spaces. We don't have time to comment all that, but I would like to at least tell what Kelly and ask Luisa if she would like 2 final minutes to comment what Maira, Pilar, and Sofia have just said, and then we finish this first webinar. Luisa?
Yes, thank you for the comments. I would like to say just short comment. The problem with public space is that when it becomes too successful, then some counter effects are actually changing urban dynamics. For example, real estate investments, gentrification. So it is always very important to balance efforts. That's why I was referring to the engagement of citizens so that they can reclaim public space for themselves and for public use, avoiding those counter effects such as privatizations that are changing the nature of public space. So that's why I was also highlighting the importance of communities in establishing this new kind of, let's say, social economy, because they have the ability also to balance all these different dynamics by taking into account possible and potential counter effects. So public space is always safe, inclusive, accessible, and giving opportunities to all, rather than giving benefit only to a small group of people through capitalism investments and so on.
Excelente, muchas gracias.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Luisa. Thank you, Maira, Pilar, and Sofia, for your presence, for your contributions, for your ideas, for this discussion that is essential for all of us, from our move for the right to the city. Thank you very much for the people that that stayed here, that are with us until this time. I would like to invite you all for the next sessions that are part of this cycle of dialogues organized by Glaxo and the group of urban equalities and the Global Platform for the Right to the City. We are going to have 2 other webinars in the next week, the 15th, with the issues cities and assessments and these inclusive urban rural areas. Then the 16th, another one, and the end on the 22nd as well in September. We're going to have the 4th and last webinar from this cycle with regard cities and human settlements with inclusive citizenship. So pay attention, so because this time is at the international UTC time, then you should pay attention to your local timing in order not to lose when the webinar is going to start. So thank you very much to all sisters, brothers. Have a wonderful week, and we see you in the next gathering in this cycle of dialogues. Bye, bye, bye.
Bendiciones para todos.
Saludos.
Gracias. Chao, chao, chao.